I'm David Van Slyke, and I have the privilege to serve as the Dean of the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, the firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. In the Maxwell School courtyard, there's an iconic statue of Abraham Lincoln by James Earl Fraser. This statue is important to me as an expression of the importance, as well as the burdens of public service and citizenship. Lincoln lived in a turbulent period in American history when there was a real question whether or not the country would survive. He was guided by two fundamental beliefs: that all men are created equal, and the second was in the wisdom of ordinary people. At Gettysburg, Lincoln challenged us, all Americans, to dedicate themselves to values of equality and freedom and to preserving government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Today, we find a polarized environment characterized less and less by debate, dialogue, and exchange, and more by a culture of contempt, in which understanding is no longer a North Star by which we seek to engage one another in respectful ways. Rather, in daily life, in public media, in private conversations, we experience a weaker commitment to ideas and sharing in each other's humanity. Instead, for many individuals, they impose value judgments that not only break down friendships, but succumb to dogmatic groupthink and rigidity that undermines the common good. The French diplomat, historian, and political scientist Alexis de Tocqueville is best known to Americans for his book Democracy in America, in which he chronicles his observations on civil and political society. But I've always been struck by a point that he makes. He notes the greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults. Today's civic and political environment has many different inequalities, but perhaps one left off so many lists is that we've grown more impatient to listening to one another. A good starting point in understanding the best argument for the other side is the importance of asking good questions. George and Kathy Hicker are committed to supporting the education and experiential learning of Syracuse University students to this important civic responsibility of listening, asking good questions, seeking to understand, and developing the knowledge, skills, and capabilities to engage and build relationships with others, and especially those that hold different perspectives. Now, this does not mean accepting intolerance and irreverence, but it does mean beyond putting people in small and narrow boxes and ascribing a value judgment to them. George Hicker is a 1968 Maxwell alum with a degree in political science. He was a member of the Syracuse University basketball team and had several nicknames, from the Blonde Bomber, which you might still see, kind of, to delivering the Hicker Flicker for his shooting prowess. George played basketball professionally, worked in entertainment and event promotion, and for more than 30 years has been the president of Cardinal Industrial Real Estate. A former trustee of the university, George, Kathy, and their family have been very generous in sharing their expertise, talents, and resources with Syracuse University, and supporting a range of initiatives, from disability advocacy, student scholarships, athletic facilities, and now a named professorship. They are very active in their different communities. George and Kathy are like many citizens in that they have a range of perspectives. And like the metaphor of an onion, when you begin to peel back the layers around issues, values, life experiences, and their own knowledge and curiosity, they are not easily stereotyped with one identity. They are looking to repair our challenged democracy in a spirit like de Tocqueville observed nearly 200 years ago. For their commitment and generosity, we are grateful for their vision to support a professorship in renewing democratic community. Professor Chris Farrisee is the inaugural Hicker Family Professor in Renewing Democratic Community. Among the courses that he teaches is a large introductory American government class, with those students, many of those students joining us today. He is actively sought out as a mentor. He's currently the Director of Graduate Studies for the Political Science Department, and like many Maxwell faculty, seeks opportunities to make research and evidence more accessible beyond the academy. His research has been funded by the Russell Sage Foundation and broadly examines the politics of income inequality. He's the author of 2 books, Welfare for the Wealthy, Parties, Social Spending, and Inequality in the United States, published by Cambridge University Press, and co-author of The Other Side of the Coin, Public Opinion Towards Social Tax Expenditures, published by the Russell Sage Foundation. His work has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the LA Times, Forbes, the American Prospect, and Vox. And Professor Farrisee received his PhD from the University of North Carolina. Chris, thank you for your leadership and how you have demonstrated it and the organization of these fantastic speakers. Thank you very much. The Maxwell School is unlike any other college in the United States because citizenship is our middle name. We're a school of more than 200 faculty, 100 staff, 3,000 students, and 37,000 alumni in all 50 states and 145 countries around the world. Our DNA is aptly expressed in the words of the Athenian Oath, inscribed right outside on the walls here of this auditorium, which inspires us to leave what we find better, greater, and more beautiful than we found it. Our values embrace free speech, an exchange of ideas, asking tough questions, and an intolerance of intolerance and of those that would marginalize and dehumanize others. Our reverence for others, our intellectual humility, and modeling dignity, and embracing diversity is what makes us a school that cares deeply about ideas, evidence, and working across all levels of government and all sectors of our economy to make a positive difference for the public good. As we begin this conversation today, I encourage you to embrace the competition of ideas, to engage free speech and diversity, and offer a vision that helps us to build trust in government and in individuals in their communities, businesses, philanthropic organizations, houses of worship, and in their families. Embrace pluralism, practice compassion, and recognize that your leadership and modeling the power of freedom and political and civic engagement will truly help us change all our communities and continue the American experiment with all the power and optimism that de Tocqueville observed 2 centuries ago. Before we begin our program, I'd like to welcome Mr. George Hicker to make brief remarks before Professor Farrisee will begin this afternoon's conversation with fellow Maxwell alum, Mr. Dave Bing. George?
I have most of this written down, but I was thinking while he was speaking, Dave and I and Jim Boeheim, and most of you are too young to know this, but we played on a team in 1965-66 that averaged 99.9 points a game without a shot clock and without a three-point line. And certain things happened in the tournament that we don't need to go into, but it kind of has something to do with what I'm about to talk about. And that's part of the background to it. But how many of you have been here for any of the other 3 events we've had? So not a lot. Well, one was with a Hall of Fame coach from Syracuse, and the other 2 were with advocates for the disabled and the LGBTQ community. These programs evolved after I was observing on television, in print, in people's conversations, young and old people, of what may have been their criteria to choose who the friends were. And the 3 things that keep jumping out were race, religion, and class. And class meaning how much money you have in your pocket. What we're trying to communicate in light of what I just mentioned goes to the age-old statement, and he happened to mention it earlier, by the great Abraham Lincoln, that all men and women are created equal. I was a political science major when I was here at Syracuse, and political science refers to social capital networks. There being 2 distinct types: bonding and bridging. Bonding is kind of what we need to get a little bit away from. That's the network where essentially everyone's similar in race, religion, ethnicity, economic class, geography, total overall values. Bridging is a network where you're involved with individuals that are different from you in socioeconomic and demographic background. That gets me to my relationship with Vaughn Harper, who was my roommate for 3 years at Syracuse, who was from Harlem. Several African-American teammates and classmates, and of course, Dave Bing. I came from a town of 2,000. When I was at the end of my recruiting visits, I visited Notre Dame, and right before Syracuse, #1, Michigan. You'll remember Cassie Russell, Larry Tragone, I could name all 5 of them. They were #1. And the last visit was at Syracuse, which is 3 hours from where I lived. So my dad and I drove up on a Friday, and the coach said, make sure and bring your sneakers with you. So we got up to what was then, I don't think it exists now, Archibald Gymnasium, and everybody was out scrimmaging. And the coach said, well, go out and play with that guy. So went out and played, and any of you been around, particularly in the schoolyards, if you don't hold the court, you're probably not going to play again. And we happened to hold the court. And so when we were done, I came over, my dad was standing with Coach Lewis, and I said, I'm going to come to Syracuse, and I want to play with that guy. It was Dave Bing. That initial encounter, coming from a small town, 56 in my graduating class, that was the introduction to an athletic, professional, business, and personal life that has abounded in building bridges. When my wife, Kathy, and I funded the professorship led by Chris Farrisee, we wanted these forums to stir you students to experience in and outside the classroom the bridging necessary to improve our democracy, our communities, our organizations, and particularly how people should treat and respect each other. Having said all that, I want to introduce my good friend Dave Bing, who my wife and I, and I'm sure Syracuse University, are grateful that he came back to his academic home, the Maxwell School. I salute you future bridge makers, and God bless you.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Farrisee, and I have the honor of holding the inaugural Hicker Family Professorship in Renewing Democratic Community. I'd like to thank Dean Van Slyke for the introduction, and especially George and Kathy for endowing the professorship. So I'd like to know, how many students do we have out here today? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming. You know, and in thinking about and preparing for today, the students who are here have gone to school at Syracuse through a global pandemic, an economic shutdown, nationwide protests against police violence and structural racism, been witness to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, saw a president get impeached not once but twice, and have experienced the trauma of frequent school shootings, including this week at Michigan State University, and have continued to be impacted by the ever-increasing and dramatic effects of climate change. Every morning when we wake up and we read the news, it's difficult not to feel bombarded with tragic stories and worrying societal trends. And when going through what seems like unprecedented times, it is helpful to have a guide. And I can think of no better person to guide us through these times than today's guest. Why? Well, Dave Bing walked onto campus as a student athlete in the turbulence of the 1960s, when there were student protests around issues such as racial justice, the war, women's rights, and a free speech movement. Okay? And through these times, Dave Bing was a standout both on the court and in the classroom. And in 1966, as a culmination, Bing was voted a consensus All-American, was drafted second by my Detroit Pistons, and most importantly, became a graduate of Syracuse University and the Maxwell School. Now, after starting his career with the Detroit Pistons, he was awarded NBA's Rookie of the Year award. And the summer after his successful first year at Detroit, there was one of the largest urban riots in American history in Detroit, the 12th Street riots, in which a largely white special force squad went into an after-hours bar and arrested 82 black citizens who were celebrating 2 war veterans who had just come home. Okay. As someone who grew up in Metro Detroit, I can't emphasize enough the impact that this event had on generations to come. And Dave Bing was a leader with the Detroit Pistons, a leader in the Detroit community, and had a legendary basketball career. Okay. So in Detroit and in his hometown of Washington and later in Boston, Dave Bing was elected to 7 NBA All-Star squads, including be awarding the MVP in the 76 game. If I remember right, that was in your hometown of DC, right? And including 3 All-NBA teams, and was the NBA scoring champion in 1968. And after a legendary basketball career, Dave Bing was inducted into the NBA Hall of Fame and elected to not just 1, but 2 all-time NBA teams, the 50th anniversary and the 75th anniversary. Now, this would be an outstanding career for most people, right? You kind of call it a day. But Dave Bing was not done yet. He went on to found Bing Steel in 1980 that later grew into the Bing Group, and navigated this new company through the recession of 1981 and 82 that was particularly hard on car companies and suppliers. And as the son of someone who was a car supplier, I understood this and we felt it in our home. His business acumen led to growing one of the largest black-owned businesses in America that earned him the honor of being named a National Minority Small Business Person of the Year in 1984. And Black Enterprise named the Bing Group its Minority Company of the Year in 1988. Now, Dave Bing retired from the business world in 2008, but guess what? He was not done yet. He answered the call to duty from his community to run and serve as the 74th mayor of the city of Detroit, after the previous mayor's office became embroiled in scandal and corruption. And as a quick aside, I was just talking with Mayor Bing. I was helping out with a state representative who was in the city during the time right before Mayor Bing came to power, and I can tell you two things. The city was an absolute mess at the time, and there was no one else in the city that we thought that might be able to guide the city through this period than Mayor Bing. There was only one person for the job, and he lived up to this billing. Mayor Bing restored the dignity back to the mayor's office and guided the city through the worst of the Great Recession, and relatedly through the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. Now, after leaving office, you might be thinking at this point, our guest of honor deserves a long vacation and to begin a well-earned retirement. But Dave Bing was not done yet. His service to the community continued through the founding of the Bing Youth Institute. This institute was created to create a strong support system for Black boys and is well known for its Bingo one-on-one mentoring program. Bingo, by the way, what was shouted out by the PA announcers, both in Syracuse and with the Pistons, right, when he would score. This program is now in its 10th year in 23 schools in the Detroit metropolitan area and has a 100% graduation rate, affecting hundreds of young men. Through his life's journey, Dave Bing has earned a reputation for being thoughtful, determined, resilient, savvy, and at every turn of life looking to give back to his community. Please join me in welcoming him back to one of his first communities, the Maxwell School. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Honorable Dave Bing.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Bing. Again, as I mentioned, being from the Detroit area, you will always be Mayor Bing to me, so thank you.
I wish my wife and kids could have heard that.
What's great is that we're taping this, and I'd be happy to send them the live link. Right. So I'd like to start with your experience here at Syracuse University. So I'm not sure people appreciate some of the obstacles that you had to overcome. So you had an eye injury that affected your peripheral vision, which you think would be kind of important for a guard to have peripheral vision. And when you came to campus, you were a husband and a father. And again, you played during this tumultuous time of the 1960s. So when you look back on the success you had on the basketball court, in the classroom, and all that you had to overcome, when you give advice to your children or people at the Bing Youth Institute, and you reflect on what it was like for you to be a young person here at Syracuse, what do you draw upon with some of your experiences from here?
Well, let me start by saying, number one, I am elated to be back here at Syracuse. So many good things happened to me and for me in the 4 years that I was here. Coming out of high school, growing up in Washington, D.C., and coming out of high school as an All-American, a lot of people in my hometown thought I was crazy when I suggested that I'm going to go to Syracuse. And the reason for that is Syracuse, over a 3-year period on the basketball team, had lost 27 games in a row. And people said, why would you, as an All-American, why would you even think about going to a place like that? They don't have basketball. And I said, well, I know I'm going to play. And so with that, Fred Lewis was coming in as the new coach, and he had a great sales pitch. And he talked to me about the university from an academic standpoint, that if I came, he thought that that would be the beginning of a turnaround of a program that was in dire need of good players. And then he talked about the other recruits that were coming in as a freshman. And one of them's here today, and another one, I think, coaches here, and George, needless to say. But it was a rude awakening for me when I got here. My upbringing in D.C., which is a city that's predominantly African American, I didn't know what to expect coming to Syracuse. I had never been to upstate New York. And when I got here, Fred Lewis was smart enough to recruit me in May. And so as I come here and I go in the quad, and I mean, all the girls are dressed scantily, and I said, oh God, this is going to be a good place for me. I looked around, and I didn't see many people who looked like me. And it was a rude awakening for me because from kindergarten through the 12th grade, I never went to school with anybody who didn't look like me. I never had a teacher who didn't look like me. I didn't have an administrator who didn't look like me. So now I come into a new environment where there are 14,000 students at that time at Syracuse, with 100 African Americans. I had one on the team with me, Sam Penseal, from Brooklyn, New York. And so we had a great football program. And ironically, Syracuse had no black basketball players at that time. And the two guys that recruited me was, for some of you, you could remember these names, Ernie Davis and John Mackey. And those are the two guys that recruited me and convinced me to come to Syracuse. Ernie being the first black to win the Heisman Trophy. John was an All-American tight end. But what impressed me more about them than the athletic prowess was what kind of persons they were. They talked to me not about sports. They talked to me about what a good education they had gotten here. They talked to me about a city that was very receptive to them, a university that was very receptive to them, and that if I came, that you would receive the same thing. I chose Syracuse, and my first roommate was an Italian kid. I had never lived with anybody other than, my family. And all of a sudden, I come from a black perspective, and my first roommate, I thought was going to be the other black guy, but it was an Italian guy whose name was Frank Nicoletti. And Frank and I became very, very close friends our freshman year. And we are very, very close friends today. My second roommate was the current coach here, Jimmy Boeheim. Now, George talks about coming from a small city. Well, Jim did also, in Lyons, New York. And Jim walked on as a freshman without a scholarship because all of the scholarships had been given out. So he came to Syracuse as a walk-on. And back then, you looked at him, he was 6'4", maybe 160 pounds, a frail guy, and so this guy can't play. And as we put together our freshman team that started to turn that whole program around, we had Rex from Albany, his teammate in high school, Dick Abelman. We had Norm Goldsmith from Long Island. We had Frank Nicoletti from Weehawken, New Jersey. We had Sam Penseal from Brooklyn Boys High. And we had this guy, Boeheim. And that freshman team turned everything around. We were 16-3. Back then, you had to play freshman. You couldn't play varsity as a freshman. And unfortunately for our varsity team, when they scrimmaged us, we beat them every time. And all of a sudden, the student body stopped coming to see the varsity play. They would come to see the freshman game and leave. And it was a total embarrassment to the organization. But as we became sophomores, everything was moving in the right direction. And we went to what was as big as the NCAA tournament today. The NIT was just as big in New York. And as sophomores, we turned the program around. We were, I think, 17, 18, and 7, something like that. And we went to the NIT. And we lost in the first round to NYU that had 3 guys that went to the NBA. And so the next year, we recruited, Rex was the only big guy at 6'8". And we had a guy that was transferring in, Chuck Richards, another 6'8" guy from Army who couldn't play until our sophomore year. So we had a nice team. Our junior year, we recruited a lot of big guys, and all of a sudden, we were ranked pretty high across the country, and there were really great expectations for us. And we didn't live up to them in our junior year. Fred Lewis would not let us go to a year-end tournament because he thought we underachieved. And so now it's a big challenge in our senior year to really let everybody know who we were and what we could do. And that's when George showed up with a bunch of other guys. He and Richie Cornwall in particular were the guys that really helped turn our team around. So in our senior year, as George said, 99.9 points a game. I mean, we could score. And you call him the blonde bomber. He was that and some. Could really shoot the ball. And if they had a 3-point back then, I don't know what kind of records George would have because he could go out. He was a distance shooter. So let's get through the basketball. I received, in my opinion, in education, not necessarily just in academics, but in people. What I cherish most here at Syracuse are the relationships that I developed, the friendships that I developed, the respect that we had for each other, not only as basketball players, but as people, because all of us came from different backgrounds. We never had more than 4 African-American players on the team, but there was never any animosity about anything as far as race was concerned. We all accepted each other for who we were, and we know we needed each other to deliver the dream that we had, and that was to play on a great team. In retrospect, when I look back once again, I'm happy with the education that I got here at Syracuse because I do think it prepared me for the next steps in my life. But the most enduring thing are the friendships that I made. And out of the 7 players that came together in my freshman year, 6 of us are still alive. And one guy got killed at the age of 23, Norm Goldsmith. But all of us are still in contact with each other. And so not only do we know each other long-term, 60 years, but in a lot of cases, we know our families, the next generation. So when I look back on my experiences here at Syracuse, I have no regrets. I know I made the right decision. And if I had to do it again, I'd make the same decision.
Great.
Well, thank you so much. And I know that the teams that you and George were on really kind of helped build Syracuse basketball that we know today. So I think, the community owes you a debt of gratitude for that. I want to pull on something that you said in your answer about the experience of coming from an all-black city and an all-black school and entering a very white campus. So you mentioned the importance of the football players, recruiting you to campus. So shortly after you left, there was the famous Syracuse 8, right, that kind of protested the conditions of not only the football program, but the university and how they thought black athletes were being treated. So, when I think about social movements and civil rights movements, a lot of them start on college campuses, and a lot of them involve student athletes. So I'm wondering about your opinion of how you've seen change the role of student athletes in civil rights movement from when you were on campus in the 60s to seeing, the role, for example, of NBA players in Black Lives Matter.
I came to Syracuse pretty much at the height of the civil rights movement. Back then, a lot of people here won't remember these names, maybe, but there was Stokely Carmichael on the university, at Howard University. There was Malcolm X in New York. There was a guy, H. Rap Brown, who was another one. There was Angela Davis. And then there was Dr. Martin Luther King. And as a youngster at that time, looking at all of them and what they were about and the things that they were espousing, it was easy, I think, to become angry and disillusioned with the system. Because we didn't think even back then that we were treated fairly. There was no equality. You looked at most of the major cities, most of the urban major cities, everybody had the same kind of problems, and that was 60 years ago. Fast forward to today, there may have been some improvements in certain areas, but we have the same problems today. We've not fixed the primary problem that this country faces, and it's racism. And I think racism engenders hate. And when you look at what's happening around the country right now with these shootings, whether they're on college campuses or not, a lot of it is because of this divide of the haves and the have-nots. And until such time we admit the fact that there's a major underclass in this country that needs help, and figure out how we do that, how we help the less fortunate, how we try to treat them as equals, we're going to continue down this road. I do think athletes who have a stage, they got name recognition on the college campuses and in professional sports. And I'm proud as hell to see them stand up the way they stand up, because they have a voice and they're going to be listened to. They are a commodity that has value. And if nothing else, this country understands dollars and cents. And a lot of these players, whether they were collegiate players or even professional players, they are worthy, in my opinion, of some of the praise that they get as people, not necessarily athletes, but they're standing up for a lot of the stuff that needs to happen right now. So as you talk about, what happened at Syracuse, I'm going to be honest, I never endured racism while I was here on the campus. It happened to me when I was here, but it was off campus. I looked at what was happening in this city, the haves and the have-nots, what 81 did to the city. It split the city up, very divisive, and now you got to figure out how to try to fix that, and at what cost. what it did, one community against the other. The racism that I saw as a teammate was at Penn State, and when I had never been called the N-word, and that happened at Penn State, and my teammates were supporting me and Sam. Then we went to West Virginia and had the same issue down there. We went to Kentucky, had the same issue down there. But all along, and one of the things that once again empowers me to be so close to my teammates is they all circle us and make sure that they had our backs. We were protected. Even our coach, Fred Lewis, at one time, they didn't want the two black players to stay in the same hotel as the white players. And Fred says, then I'm taking the team home. And they changed. But change comes through a lot of adversity, and you can't be afraid of change. And one of the things that happens with our young people today, everybody talks about them, in a negative way. They are our future leaders. They are our future. And they're the ones that see what's happening in this country. And they want to make change, and they want to be part of that change. So we need to encourage them as best we can to continue to do what they're doing. Fight for change. Because I think if we continue with the status quo for the next 25, 50, 100 years, I'm not sure from a demographic standpoint or a democratic standpoint where our country is going to be. I heard somebody say something up on the stage earlier about my generation and the generation after me. We've got to listen. It's a skill that most of us don't have. Everybody wants to talk. Everybody wants to give you their opinion. These kids got opinions too. The world has changed, and it's going to continue to change. We better start listening to them, respecting them, supporting them, because they're the ones that's going to make this a better world.
Okay, thank you for that. So two things to know. One, you won a Civil Rights Museum Award, right, for your role in movements. And also I'd say exactly right about needing to listen to the next generation. And the last speaker series we have is about the politics of Gen Z and the future of America. So I hope that folks who are here come to that talk and listen to the next generation. So I want to pull on something in your last answer about the haves and the have-nots, and the need to lift people up. So you have this unique experience. I talked about in the opening remarks the awards that you won for running Bing Steel, later the Bing Group. You were also mayor of a large city in which you were involved in economic development. So what advice would you give to officials in Syracuse and Central New York who want to increase the percentage of minority-led businesses? What should we do to promote more black businesses in Syracuse and the surrounding area?
One of the things that I've seen is everybody likes to give lip service. And that's it. They tell you how important you are, what they want to do for you, what they expect from you, but they give you no resources to work with. I can remember when I started my business with 4 people back in 1980. And it was a minority-owned business because of ownership. And I saw over a period of time where there were a lot of people, minorities, mostly blacks, getting into business, but really not owning the business, not in control of the business. You've got to really get to know people and figure out how you're going to support them. What are their needs? Everybody wants to be an instant success. And that ain't life. That ain't real. It don't happen like that. My goal was to build from the ground up. I was in a company where I trained for 2 years in the steel business where there were no blacks. And that was a strategy for me because what I was getting ready to get into was very expensive. Luckily, I made some money in the NBA, nothing like the guys make today. But sometimes when my mother was alive, I would say to her, why don't you wait? 30 or 40 years later, I'd be okay. But I looked at the automotive industry in Detroit. I had a good reputation. I knew I wasn't ready when I left basketball to be an entrepreneur. But once again, I could go back to my Syracuse days and what I learned here from an academic standpoint, from a financial standpoint, that I could do this. I just needed the opportunity. And the car companies gave us that opportunity. So they had programs for minority suppliers. And I started in 1980. And grew the company from a $2 million startup company with 4 people to 28 years later to a company with over 1,400 employees and $300 million in sales. But I did that all in the city of Detroit. And the reason that I wanted to be in Detroit was to help the people that needed help, that needed jobs, that nobody cared about. And so as I look at the staff that I had, 80% of my employees were African Americans from the city of Detroit, where people said, you're going to fail because they're not ready. Well, how do you get them ready unless you give them opportunity and train them? And so we did that. And I look back now in retrospect, and I'm very proud of what we accomplished because I had people who were employed by me early on, and then I was there long enough to see their kids employed. And so I know I helped families that way. And there were a lot of people who worked with me as I started to grow. I couldn't do everything on my own. I knew what my limitations were. And that comes back to basketball, a team sport. I knew what my strengths were. I knew what my weaknesses were. And I played to my strength. And I went out and got people. I wasn't an engineer. When I got into a place where I needed engineers, I hired engineers. I wasn't an operator. When I needed somebody to operate my plants, I went and got people who had experience in operations. And what I knew I could do was in sales and marketing, finance, and HR. Those were my strengths, and that's what I focus on. But I brought people around me who had the strengths that I didn't have, and that's the way we built the organization. So there were a lot of people who wanted to be part of that program, but a lot of them were fronts. In name only and race only. They said, we're a minority company. And I decided that's not who I am, that's not what I'm going to do, not what I'm going to be. And so things worked out extremely well for me and a lot of my employees. So when it was time for me to leave the business back in 2008, that's when I decided to sell the business. I've had a good run, and it's time for me to enjoy life. I'm 64 years old at that point. Made some money, living a good life, helped a lot of people, and it was time for me to put my feet up, kick back, so I thought, and enjoy life.
Yeah. So this is the next chapter that I like to talk about, so great lead-in. So kicking back, but then the city calls, right? Like the city's in crisis, and you are getting asked by business leaders, community leaders to run for mayor and help, restore Detroit. You mentioned in the book, and this really struck me, that your first priority was to restore trust in the office, restore trust in government. So I teach in this classroom, and on the first day of class, I put up slides that show a 40-year decline in trust in government, right? 40 years. I mean, it looks like a ski slope, right? So there has been such a precipitous decline in trust in government. What did you do to try to restore trust in the mayor's office? What do you think worked, didn't work? What lessons would you have for the country?
Lead by example. In the business that I was in, I had to be accessible to my customers 24/7. And if you're in government, you ought to be, I think you ought to have the same attitude. You are accessible to the citizenry 24/7. The tough thing for me was that I didn't live in Detroit at that time. I lived in the suburbs. And the only way that I could run for mayor was to move back into the city. And I had issues with that early on. My wife is a Detroiter, born and raised, and she said to me, we had just built a home in a nice community, and she said, well, I think you're the right guy, and it's probably the right time for somebody like you, but I'm not going back. So you go back and do what you need to do, and you can visit me on weekends. Well, luckily, we had been together for a while, so okay. A tough thing, the first thing I had to do, because, you know, as you talk about trust, we had so many politicians that were doing illicit things that just tore down the trust from the citizens in any big city. That's what's happening. If you go into politics to make money, you made the wrong choice. You got to go in to serve. And I wanted people to know that I wasn't going to come into the mayor's office to try to make money. I was fortunate and blessed that had already happened for me. And so I could go in there, and I went in. I sat on 4 major boards, where I was probably earning anywhere from $200,000 to $250,000 a year off of just board fees. And I said, I got to give them up, because there's a conflict of interest with 3 of those companies that do business with the city of Detroit. What the prior mayor had done, you talk about eroding trust in government, he had done that big time. And I said, the first thing I got to do is let them know I'm not doing this for money. So I got off all those boards, and I said, I'm coming in and I'm not going to take salary. And so they said, you got to take salary. So I said, okay, give me $1. So I was paid $1 a year for being mayor, and what goes along with it. In retrospect, if I look back now, I said, damn, what did I do that for? But, and then you got to trust people. And, you know, I'd heard so many negative stories about city employees. They don't care. They're thieves. They're stealing. They don't work hard. And so I wanted to get to know the people. So by my previous career, I mean, I was spending a lot of hours trying to develop a company. So I said, I got to do the same thing as a mayor. I would tell you a true story. First day in the office, I get in the office about 6:30, 7 o'clock, and nobody's there. I wait, make some coffee. 7:30, nobody's there. 8 o'clock, a couple of people start to trickle in. So I went to a couple of people and said, what time do you guys start here? So, well, you know, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I said, no, that ain't gonna work for me. You're gonna be here at 8 o'clock, and you're gonna work until 5 o'clock, because I had people leaving at 3:30, 4 o'clock. So people weren't doing what they were supposed to do. So I had to set the example. And so we started building trust amongst each other. I'd go into the community. There were people, there were areas in the city that I had never been to in all my years in Detroit, because there was no need for me to go to certain areas in the city. And all of a sudden, as mayor, you got the whole city. And I saw the way some people were living, and you would have thought it was the 1930s or 40s. I said, how in the hell are people surviving and living like this? We got to do something about it. So I constantly went to the neighborhood and met with people and got feedback from a lot of people, letting them know that I was somebody that wanted to do the right thing, that they could trust. And, you know, they could watch me and see what I was doing, see what kind of decisions I was making, see which way the administration was going in terms of giving them the necessary support that was needed by services. And things started to get better. And when I first looked at the financial statements at the city of Detroit, I said, whoa, we were bankrupt. We just have not filed for bankruptcy. We were $18 billion in debt and couldn't borrow money. So it's hard to pay your bills. The worst thing that could happen to me, I felt, was I can't meet payroll. So I had to make sure that I went to certain organizations and said, look, you want to get paid in 10 days. I can't do that. I need to cut a deal with you. It's 30 days, or some cases it's 60 days or 90 days, because I don't have the cash to do what I need to do, because I can't miss a payroll. And so I got a lot of people in the business community that trusted me, and without them, there's no way that we would have been able to bring the city back. The business community came big time. And so as you talk about whether it's Syracuse or any other city, I don't think politicians are the ones that lead it. I think the business community leads it. And if they're committed, because they are invested, they can make a major difference, and they did in Detroit.
Great, thank you. Well, I have to say, from someone who lived in and around the city, you made a major difference. And if you're looking for a vacation spot, Detroit is now a vibrant city, and you can draw a line to the work that Mayor Bing did to Detroit's resurgence today. So thank you for that. So I now want to turn to your mentoring work of today. And, you know, it struck me in reading about the Bing Youth Institute that as a father of 3 daughters, you formed a youth institute that is focused on Black boys and developing these mentoring relationships. And, you know, that got me thinking that in the past 10 years, there have been at least 3 major books written about boys and societal problems. And the theses of these 3 books are that a lot of major societal problems can be traced back to problems with boys in society. You know, some examples: boys compared to girls are less likely to graduate high school and college, are more likely to have drug and alcohol issues, are more likely to partake in violent crime, are more likely to be underemployed or unemployed. So they argue that we need to form policy around boys, addressing this as a systemic problem. With your work with young boys in the Bing Youth Institute, does that resonate with you, that argument that a lot of these societal problems are problems with the environments we have in raising young boys? And if so, what policy prescriptions would you offer?
Oh, absolutely, that is a major problem, and that's why I focus on boys. I was very fortunate growing up. I come from a 2-parent home. When you look at society today, you know, 50% of marriages are now end up in divorce. And so in most cases, the woman winds up trying to carry the load, and men just kind of walk away. And so all of a sudden, I saw, when I was coming up in school, I had male teachers, and not just a gym teacher, but I had male teachers in math, in science, in history, and those were role models. Today, 90% of educators, teachers, are women. The men, for whatever reason, whether it's the education that they don't have, or whether that profession doesn't pay enough for them, they shied away from it. So all of a sudden, the motivation that I had in school from male teachers is no longer there. And then if you come from a broken home where there's not a man, where do the boys find their role models? And so all of a sudden, women are left with the responsibility of raising boys. Got to be very, very demanding. Boys become teenagers, and as my mom would say, they don't pay attention to the women anymore, mother or not. And so the boys don't have the role models that they need. Now, I got 3 daughters, but they're all adults. Matter of fact, one of my daughters is a Syracuse grad. But you got to think about who these girls are going to marry, who the father is going to be, and what impact that male presence has on these young boys. And so early on, I said, Bob and I, we about 6 months, we went out and did a little research, different community-based organizations that were doing mentoring. But mentoring is more than just showing up once in a while. Boys need consistency. They need to know that somebody is going to be there that they can believe in, that they can trust, that they can look up to. And so we identified 4 schools with 10 boys each. We don't know the boys, we don't pick the boys. The principal does that. And we didn't want boys who were A and B students. We thought that they had a chance to survive. We didn't want the kid who was an F. We wanted the kids in the middle of the pack who could very well get lost. But if they had the right kind of support around them, they could do okay. And so in Detroit, state of Michigan, 52% of boys that enter the 9th grade never graduate. So all of a sudden, there are no jobs available for them. And so what do? In a lot of cases, they do the wrong thing. They become criminals. And obviously, that's not a good thing. So long story short, we identified 2 junior high schools, 2 middle schools, and 2 high schools, one on the east, one on the west. And the superintendent said, okay, you can have these 4 schools as a start. Well, we got the students, but I didn't have mentors. So all of a sudden, I know a lot of guys. I said, hey, look, I went out and just say, look, I need some help. This is what I'm trying to do. This is what I need you to do, blah, blah, blah. So it has worked tremendously well. We have had over 300 boys in the 8-9 years that we've been doing this. We've had 51 of our boys have graduated. We have a 100% graduation rate. We have probably something close to 60% of our boys are now in college. And those that didn't want to go to college, because college is not for everybody, they're looking for a job. So we have now kind of moved back into workforce development. So the Bing Group now is a vendor to the city of Detroit. We got over 100,000 houses that need, most of the demolition is done. Now we're trying to save homes. We're trying to fix homes up. So we got some of our mentors who are entrepreneurs, and we are now training boys for those particular entrepreneurs. We got a major grant from Kellogg where we can train our boys and pay them to get trained, put them with entrepreneurs and say, you train them, and when you finish training them for 8 to 10 weeks, we sign an agreement, you have to hire them. And so that's starting to really work well. So it's a lot of good stuff is happening right now. And I think the biggest impact that I'm making is what I'm doing now, because I know I'm changing lives, and I know I'm bringing some of these boys out of crime and out of poverty.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you. And you had mentioned the importance of hearing from the next generation. So let's turn now and hear from the next generation and hear from you in the audience. If you have a question for the Honorable Dave Bing, if you want to raise your hand, and we have people coming around with microphones, and please go ahead and. Okay.
My name's Tom Clinton. Dave, I have a question about a topic we hear a lot about today in the news, misinformation and people not knowing who to trust. And given your experience with local and observing national public policy issues, what's your take on how you would target people toward certain people of the highest integrity and competence in media, politics, and whatever? Who should we listen to, and who do you stay away from as far as listening to or paying attention to?
Tom, good to see you. We go back a few years. He was here when I was here, so it's a long relationship. Can't tell people who they should listen to. I mean, that's a personal choice. But one of the things, not only do we see this in the political arena, but we see it in media, where our media is not trusted much anymore. People understand that media is a thriving business, and but there are certain people, certain stations, certain publications that I will pay attention to. I will tell you, I'm not a Fox guy. But other than that, across the board, I mean, I will listen to it just to make sure that there's balance in what I'm hearing or reading or seeing. But when you talk about disinformation, that's rampant today. And I once again think our young people are smart enough. And here at Syracuse, you've got an unbelievable school from a media standpoint. And I would encourage as many of our students as possible to go to Newhouse, because it's renowned. People got to earn your trust. And they do that by making sure that you develop, I think, communication skills. So when you know, I know when somebody is BSing me. I'm smart enough to understand that. And I think a lot of our young people know that also. So I want to go back to our young folks and say that they're the ones that we're going to challenge with making some of the changes that are necessary. So when you look at what it was like 50, 60 years ago from a media perspective, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have all of the social media. We didn't have these stations fighting each other for importance. And so they get you riled up by some of the things they report. And sometimes they take us to be stupid. And that's why these kids that are here getting an education is so damn important, because they're not stupid, they're not gullible. They know when somebody is BSing them. And they are now in a position to start challenging, whether it's politicians, business people, or the media. But it's kind of hard to try to tell people who they should follow, who they should listen to, et cetera. Just be open-minded.
Mr. Bing, it's an honor to meet you. Two quick questions. First, what is your favorite memory on the Syracuse University basketball team? And then my other one is, we talked about it earlier, the jump going from college to the NBA. From kind of your view, given the racial climate at the time and given like all of the obstacles you had to deal with, what was kind of like that transition like going from Syracuse to the Detroit Pistons?
I think my teammates and a lot of my schoolmates thought that I should go to the Knicks. Back then, it wasn't like today. They do things a little differently. The worst two teams get the choice for the top player. And they did that by flipping a coin. We've modernized everything a bit today, so I thought I was going to New York because Syracuse, I mean, a lot of our population is from the East Coast. Played a lot of our games in New York at the Old Garden and had outstanding performances, so I thought for sure that I was going to be going to New York. And I think my teammates and a lot of my schoolmates were hoping for that because a lot of them are from New York or from the East Coast and would have been able to see me play, professionally. The biggest, and so when it was Detroit, I was disappointed. But I did understand that Cassie Russell at the University of Michigan from Ann Arbor, a stone's throw from Detroit, was the choice that they were going to make. And so I understood it. Didn't like it because I wanted to go to New York. But as it turned out, Detroit was the best thing for me. And I got there, didn't know much about the city at all. I knew it was the car capital of the world. I knew it was Motown, and those are things that I know. I had no family there. And so the transition was a little tough because the people in Detroit wanted Cassie as the number one draft choice and not me. And so all of a sudden I had to overcome that. And the only way I thought I could do that was through my play and through my character in terms of what I needed to do in the community. So it worked out beautiful for me. Had I gone to New York, I think my career would have been quite different because New York is a tough place to play. But as somebody coming in from the outside, you could deal with it because you don't have to live with it day to day. But things happen in Detroit for a reason, and I'm the beneficiary of that. The first question, I don't remember what you asked.
Oh, is a favorite Syracuse University basketball game to park?
George, you may remember this. We were out in L.A., in the L.A. Classic.
You had 46
Yeah. So we didn't win the tournament, but we had outstanding games. And George and myself and his dad were kind of upset because we didn't win the championship in that series. And we're walking looking for a bar. And George's dad was telling us where to go. And he saw a blinking light. That's it. Let's go there. And we drowned our tears away that night. And that's something that I'll always remember because I'll tell you, the parents of my teammates were like family. I mean, I go back again. I mean, rooming with a white guy for the first time in my life was one thing. And I'll never forget, Frank Nicoletti, my roommate as a freshman, asked me to come and visit him at his home in Weehawken, New Jersey. And I went there, and his parents welcomed me with open arms. Then I did the same thing, and I invited him down to my home, which is pretty much quite different than what he was used to and how he grew up. But But that just solidified how important those relationships were. Rex, I remember staying at your parents' house, when we were seniors. So we were like family, and we still are. And as I look back and I can say, we had a lot of good times here at Syracuse as players, but the friendships are lifelong that are so very important.
So as we're transitioning to the next question, I want to take a little liberty to ask you about a Syracuse basketball memory that you write in the book. Playing in the Miami Classic, you get to meet Cassius Clay before he's Muhammad Ali, right before the Sonny Liston fight. So how was that, meeting Cassius Clay?
It was unbelievable. He was brash, talked a lot of stuff, but our trainer, Julie Reichel, at that time, had coached Cassius in the Olympics. And we are sophomores playing in the Miami Classic. And he asked Sam and I, Cassius is going to be down here. He's training. Would you guys like to go meet him? I mean, what the hell are we supposed to say? We got very excited. I went to meet him. He was only in his early 20s at the time. But he was such a figure that we were excited to see him. We went and saw him work out, and afterwards he said, I know you guys are supposed to play. I'll come to your game. And he did. So that was the first time that we met, and it was a great experience to meet him back then. Yeah, great experience.
Mr. Bing, it's a pleasure to see you here. Yeah. You mentioned when you were on campus you didn't have problems with racism, but when you got into Syracuse, there was a challenge. People who move from outside, Syracuse of color, when they come here, can feel that racism. However, you mentioned about 81, and there was the 15th Ward, and that was a melting pot. You had everybody there. I remember I've been involved with the NAACP for the last 20 years, and they would tell me stories that the community of color would reach out to the black athletes, tipping in. Thornton Park had a big Sunday gathering. Do you remember those?
Oh, yes.
How did the experience of being at Syracuse University, seeing that conflict, but also seeing you had black businesses back then and such, how did that shape you about civil rights?
It really let me know that we live in an unequal world. Now, I got to know a family in the 15th Ward, Caldwell family. The guys before me, the football players in particular, introduced me to that family and says, if you need to go off campus and you want to find out something about the community, go down to the 15th Ward. Here's the lady that we want to introduce you to. And they introduced me to her, and for my 4 years here, she was like a mother. And I got to know her children, and they taught me a lot about what they were enduring. And they were, I think, somewhat lucky because they had hope. And I remember her 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter wound up becoming a United Airlines stewardess. I know the son had a chance, I think, to come to Syracuse for 1 year. I don't remember whether he graduated or not. But they did okay as a family coming out of the 15th Ward. But once again, you go down there back then, and maybe even now, I don't know. It was tough. And I think some of the people and some of the families down there were very happy to see some guys from the university come down there and mingle with them and get to know them. But, I mean, they're people like anybody else. And just because they don't have some of the advantages that some of us have, don't make them anything less. And so from a civil rights standpoint, a lot of work to be done, still a lot of work to be done. And we should not forget that. We should not sweep that under the rug and think because some of us are doing much better, we forget about everybody else. And, we just concentrate on what we're doing and how we live day to day. But if you don't reach back and try to bring somebody up to help them, then you're going to get brought down.
Thanks again for coming here to speak. My name is David Becker. You've already met my dad. And my question is, with the large amount of refugees and immigrants coming into the country, they may also be facing some of the same issues that some of the people in the Bing Youth Foundation may be, almost to a higher degree from being displaced from their homes. What are different ways that we as a society can help them much in the same way that you help young boys with the Bing Youth Foundation?
I think we've got to open up to them. We've got to let them know that they're welcome, number one. But that's not enough. We got to bring resources to the table. And that's where the politicians play a significant role, because the government, has got a lot of money and a lot of programs. But we need to make sure that the government officials who are in charge of a lot of the funding that is necessary for some of those immigrants and those families coming in gets to the right people, gets in the right hands. Too often, there's a deal cut with somebody, and they get the money, and they do what they want to do with the money, and it's not for the issue that's on the table that you're talking about right now. So I think our country still is a beacon of hope, and I don't wish that we close the door on immigrants. I mean, immigrants built this country. They were a significant part of what was happening in the development of this country. And when you look at specific industries, you take the healthcare industry for an example, you've probably got we are more dependent on immigrants than any other industry, maybe automotive and IT or some other ones. But we got to continue to bring talent in, because our country, take the birth rate in this country, it's been going down for years and years. And the only way that we're going to get the skills and the people that we need is to open our border up to some of those folks, to bring them in the right way. And give them the tools that they need to be successful. We've got to support them.
So I have a question. Oh, I'm up here. How you doing? My name is Jordan. I first just want to thank you for being here. Right, I appreciate you setting aside that time to come speak to us. One of the questions that I do have, I want to first applaud you on all the things that you have accomplished, right? I feel like there comes a time where we as black men and women come to understand that we can't solve everything, right? And I wanted to know, in spite of all the accomplishments that you have had, how do you maintain a form of mental stability and fitness when you look outside of yourself and see that as a black community globally, we are still facing or in a time of uncertainty?
I give credit to my parents and to God. Neither one of my parents graduated from high school. They matriculated to Washington, D.C. from South Carolina for a better life. But they had the wherewithal and the courage to raise their children the right way. And even when I came to Syracuse and didn't know what to expect, I reached back to my parents, and they said, as long as you're respectful and you treat people the right way, you know, things will work out for you. And to your question, I don't think that we can be satisfied with where we are. I mean, we're in a culture environment right now, and I don't think that's healthy at all. We have to respect people for who they are and where they are. And from a black perspective, I think this young generation, I see a lot of kids in our program who want to be entrepreneurs, and I applaud that in a big way, because I know what it meant for me and what I could do for others. We need to own businesses. You know, we don't just need to work for somebody all the time. And a lot of the young people today, and the ones in the program that I listen to, they say, if I get a job, I'm going to learn the skill, and then I want to take that skill and run my own business. And I applaud that in a big way. So we can help each other by doing that. We need to support each other much more than we do and stop just giving that meaningless lip service. I just see too much of that. And you got to take people and put your arms around them and train them and let them know that you truly care. And if you've got skills that you can share with them, then you ought to do that. So I don't think there are any easy answers, but entrepreneurship is one of the ways that I think a lot of us can get out of where we are today.
And then my last question. I want to ask, if you could speak to the younger 21-year-old version of yourself, what advice would you give him?
I think you got to have a plan. And, you know, too many of us just off the cuff, you know, this is what I think I want to do, or this is who I think I want to be, and you don't prepare for anything. I had a high school coach who always used to tell me, you got to plan. Plan for the things that you can't control, things that you can't see. He always said, he told me something, the P principles, and I'll never forget it. 5 words start with P. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. Prepare, whether it's on the basketball court, on the classroom, or at a job. Prepare yourself. Have a plan.
Great, thank you. So before we thank our guest, I too want to extend some thank yous. A thank you to Maxwell Dean, David Van Slyke, Bethany Wallawender, Jessica Smith, Jesse Youngman, Tom Fazio, Kim Bliss, and all the IC team for their technical support. I want to thank all of you for showing up today and let you know that following this, there'll be a reception right outside in the lobby where not only will there be food and drink, but there'll be copies of the excellent memoir, Attacking the Rim, available for sale and a chance to meet the Honorable Dave Bing. And I'll go back to something that Dean Van Slyke said at the beginning. Right outside here, there is the Athenian Oath right behind us. And I can think of no Maxwell alum that has embodied and lived the oath of making a city not only not less, but better than it came before. So for all the service and work that you have done in Syracuse and in Detroit and in the nation, please join me in thanking the Honorable Dave Bing. Thank you.